Hi, Dr. Lauren Kaczynski. We're here now for video number 13 of 33 in my video challenge, and it's still February 9th, 2023. I have to do a makeup because yesterday I didn't get to make my video of the day, but I'm determined to stay on track, and so here we are. And since this is kind of time out of time, I think it makes sense to go back in time a little bit before even this 10-year ago period when I'm getting on my path of finding a different way to be a doctor, sort of redefining really what it means to me to be a doctor and to be engaged in the work of healing. So I presented this idea of imagining a work environment that supported the well-being of doctors and other of our co-providers of care in the same way that we intend to support patients. And really, this has to do with some ideas about the environment and how inextricable our experiences from the setting that we're practicing in, and also how the setting that we're practicing in is dependent on our experience and what we put into it. So I had a conversation with somebody this week who I talk with periodically, who is a trained physician but went into information technology early on and now is doing some other things, sort of broadening his horizons of what he does, because he really thought that, well, I'll say a little bit about it, but it's extraneous to the story in a way, but he really thought that as a physician in information technology, he'd be able to bridge that gap between doctors and the EMR, in short. And that didn't work out exactly the way that he thought that it would. So he's sort of jousting at this in a different way. But in a conversation that we had recently, I had been talking about reciprocity over some time, and he was talking about an idea that our investment in what the patient's experience is also an investment in what our own experience is. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting that you're saying that, because I've tried to talk about this a lot, and it's not something that there's ready experience for. And yet it's plain as mud. Like when you're working in the office every day and your patients come in and they're already upset by the time they get into your office by any number of things. It could be the parking, it could be the way they were spoken to at the front desk, it could be their illness, it could be what's going on in their lives, but whatever it is, there is a lot about the practice environment that isn't necessarily making that any better. And yet my sense was, as the physician sitting in that office, it was my responsibility to try to get things back on track and to improve that patient's experience, both because that's what I was there for, to help them, but also because we're the face of the institution. So it's pretty clear to me that when the patients aren't happy, we're not happy. And when we're not happy, the patients aren't either. So by definition, there's a tie between these things. And we should be seeing and experiencing them and participating in solutions in that way. Well, sometime long, long ago, before I'd even left Alaska to retool, I had a dream. And there have been maybe half a dozen dreams that I've had beginning before I started my surgery residency, through my training and then in practice, that have been kind of like visions or downloads, or really powerful looks into a deeper sense that I had about what I'm here for. But in the dream that I want to tell you about, I had a vision of a particular kind of hospital. And it's a hospital in which we did well. I mean, all the people who worked there were addressing our own and had ways of working that addressed our own well-being. And that there was a graduated sense of care for patients too, so that, as I conceived of it, this was just principally a surgical hospital. And it was built in the country, and it was a big wooden structure with glass windows on the front, like small, paned glass windows, almost like a wall of glass. It was so light inside, and tiered as it stepped up the hillside, so that at each level there was a sense of light coming in. And there was a portion of this part of the hospital that was for operations and inpatient care, and that patients would increase their ability to participate in their own activities day by day as they recovered from surgery, and that when they no longer needed that same kind of intensive all hands on deck care that in the hospital, that they would move to a cottage on this property where they could still have meals and their medications were delivered, things were looked after in that way, help them, but they could get up, they could tidy their own room and make a bed, but they weren't really fully back in their own home environment yet. And there were other things on this property. There were other ways of interacting with, well, some of this will sound frankly goofy because we don't really have a context that we're developing for it here, but it had to do with being able to make art or being able to sit in the presence of other people, but without great demands on your time and attention. I mean, it's almost like I got a blueprint for the building. So what do I do with that? I mean, I could write it off and say it's just a dream, but on the other hand, my soul is speaking to me about a version of what it could be like to live and to work around and engaging with a very different kind of institution, not one that's hermetically sealed, where we're under fluorescent lights, where there's a sense of no communication with the natural world outside or with the changing of the day. I have carried this picture with me, and it came back again a few years later in a somewhat different form. But every time I talk with people about this experience of a healing center, of a place that we give care and that people receive necessary treatment and recover, the question is always, it's a great idea, Lauren, but how are you going to pay for it? And that how are you going to pay for it is a vital question. There's no doubt about it. But it's also a question that then precludes actually even allowing the dream, actually even allowing a vision of something else to happen. Needless to say, I've spent a lot of time in this in-between time, this transition, looking at people's different experiments with trying to make a different hospital, to reimagine the hospital. And in a certain way, when this regional chair told me about how concierge care programs had failed and how he just thought the hospital itself was kind of a failing proposition, I also thought, well, maybe I don't need to build a new hospital. What I started to think was maybe there would be ways to change the experience within the existing structure in a variety of ways, to create a different experience for the patient and the providers by installing certain features that would substantively address some of the experiences that we have. So all of that is taking shape against the backdrop of this conversation and whether this job, being a vice chair of professionalism, is going to work or not, or whether it's possible to try to improve things by just working in one channel like the doctor channel. But in tandem with this, I was also starting to think about a suite of software applications that might change patient and provider experience as well. And that opened up some different doors that became part of this process, this journey, as well as really inspiring a kind of prototype, a small experience that I had building a place called the Seed House, which was meant to be kind of a test case or a proving ground for some of this, as well as this different way of approaching the construct of the hospital and working with what was already there, not being held up by the idea that I couldn't constitute a new hospital. And I should say that in that time when I was really looking at the built space and what was known about the healing potential of a built space, and this happens on a lot of levels. It can happen. Well, maybe I'll save that actually and make that tomorrow's video to talk about the built space a little bit. And I haven't been reading about it lately, so my impressions are going to be somewhat older, but probably still include more than you've had time to consider yourself. And who knows what will happen hearing some other ideas about it. So here's the makeup video, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, February 10, 2024. Yeah, dream.